Now, when we first viewed this property over a year ago, it was very desirable to us as a renovation home because some of the ceilings were missing here. For example, above me now, in the dining room, there was no plasterboard here at all, and in the hallway. And that's because it was for sale over a really bad winter and the pipes froze, burst and flooded the property. Now, since replaced it up here with 12mm, so I could just fill the gaps, but for the hallway, different story, I had to go for 9mm so I could then match skim with the existing plaster. And since I had really good results with the Pro Roll Nova, which is a roll and skim, on my new opening, gave me the confidence to have a go at skimming the hallway ceiling myself. And also fix a lot of the cracks in the ceiling hallway before we put the hardwood flooring down. So the question is, how hard can it be? Now, I'm going to start in the hallway around the loft hatch that I installed late last year, which actually many of you said to hire a plasterer at the time rather than doing it myself. But I thought, why not? And you can see some water staining on the edge here where the existing plaster is. I'd also added some new screws to the old area so you can see where it's chipped the plaster away, and a fair few cracks where the skim isn't attached to the plasterboard anymore. Whether it was before, don't know. But the first thing that I did was chip away any of the loose stuff with a filling knife. That came off a bit too easy. And much to our disappointment, I had to make it a lot worse before it got better. And if I didn't do this or missed any, it could ruin the skim that I later add on. And all the while I'm doing this, I'm trying to avoid opening a can of worms. Although that seemed pretty impossible. Take this spot nearby, for example. We originally thought someone had stepped on the plasterboard in the loft, but there was no sign of damage from above. But that's not to say someone hadn't put pinpointed pressure on it, hence cracking the skim. And there's quite a few like this around the house. So it had to go, which at this point I found the measliest bit of paper tape. In fact, I'm not even sure it was paper tape. But once I'd removed all the loose plaster and scored the existing crack to make it wider, I'd screwed in a noggin from above between two of the joists. That way I had another section so I could screw the ends of the plasterboard to, using drywall screws of course. I also removed enough skim where possible so it was wide enough to add scrim tape. But if the plaster was firmly stuck on, I didn't want to really upset things too much, so I considered putting paper tape on towards the end. While I was up here, I also added more screws where I thought they'd be beneficial before brushing on neat SBR on all of the dusty gaps of skim that I'd created and the joins which I'll be pre-filling later. But now it was a waiting game for the SBR to dry, which can take at least half an hour, which allowed me to move on and make a lot more mess elsewhere. So while I wait for the SBR over there to dry, then I can do some pre-filling, because that looked a bit porousy. I have just been on a skimming removal hunt. I found this area here, well, the skim was sagging, well, the plaster, and when I removed it, I realised that the screws weren't really holding the actual board to the joists. The screw holes are so deep, I could put my little finger through it. And as I put some screws in, I found the same, so I've had to put them just below rather than sink them in. Now, the cause of this could be because the water tank is above there and it leaked. Rather than taking all the plasterboard off, I just want to do some quick fixes. So that is no longer moving. We know that there's cracks here and, well, everywhere. And then this area used to look like this. If you come closer, I'll show you. Like that. And it's actually the plasterboard just not gripped to the joist anymore. You've got a couple of clamp nails here, so far away from each other. So I need to nip that in, but I'm going to take this off now as well. It's not stuck at all. You've got the odd thing where there's a join, and instead of paper tape, they've got some mesh, string mesh. Now, in the living room, we had cracks all throughout the ceiling, but it wasn't as bad as this. So instead, for the area, I put some extra support noggins above and just screwed straight through the plaster and screwed straight through the plasterboard into the joist. But here, I'm not going to do that. I think we need some paper tape here. I'll try and remove this end here as well, and we'll just do some patch filling as we go. Although if you look here, this side of the plasterboard's not going anywhere, but I want to attach the two together with some tape. Let's try and get a screw in. Hopefully it won't pop out. In fact, the plaster inside there looks a lot better condition than that because that is very crumbly. I think that's the problem. It's crumbly over there. It's not here. Oh. Well, I know that there's wood there. I can see it. So maybe it's right on the edge. I'm going to have to go on an angle then. It's not what I want. No, I can't get that. I can see it here. Big wooden thing here. No, that's not working. So I keep missing, even though I can see the wood. So it must be over this end. So I've got to go up there and add some more supports. After a quick investigation, I realised I needed to take timber up there because the plasterboard was indeed shy of the existing joist for a few feet. So I sat my timber against it and attached it with screws using my impact driver. Oh, there's a bloody wasp here. So this again gave me another surface area to fix the plasterboard to. I'm now just doing another check for loose skim, although Mr. TCD wasn't happy with me ripping all the loose stuff off, but I couldn't see any other way to fix it. As for the area with some blown plaster, I added more screws just in case. And I also revealed this hole which I could stick my little finger in. So after brushing SBR on that patch, I took a scrap piece of plasterboard into the loft, one of your previous tips actually, and stuck it down with no more nails. That gave me a more secure surface to fill from below before I skim over it later. Meanwhile, I was able to return back to the loft hatch area and pre-fill all those joins with regular filler and leave to dry overnight before sanding any slight protrusions. Now, if I tried to put scrim tape on now, it wouldn't work. It'd just come off. So I had to SBR it again so it would adhere better once it was dry. I also added tape to any joins I exposed, providing I had enough surface area to stick it over. Now for the Roll Nova skim, which I was kindly gifted a few months ago, but although I had great success in my last project, I wanted to see how it performed in different scenarios. So if you're not familiar, you dip the wire roller straight into the tub.
Right, let's try it.
Then brush it over any areas that you need to skim. I first rolled it over one of the sections with missing skim, and again, like last time, I found it hard to build up within a deep section and found my trowel was so much easier to apply it. Bear in mind though, it's buildable in 1 to 2 millimeter layers and it doesn't dry as quickly as a regular filler, but it is really easy to sand. It's very forgiving for a beginner. So if you don't have time to wait, this probably isn't going to be for you. The reason I didn't mind in this situation, because I was taking a trip to Newcastle to meet some DIY YouTuber friends. Any familiar? Then onto the majority of the ceiling around the loft hatch. I had to use my work lights because it's so dark in here, which I was hoping it wouldn't strobe, but sorry, it did. And I rolled it over most of the area, but troweled around the corners because it's so easy to catch the walls. I found it easier to open the hatch and use them as step ladders, but the sides of the hatch were too narrow for the roller. So again, I'm troweling this whole area. To smooth out, I used my speed skim, which flattened quite a lot of the areas, but it also showed me the bits where I was shy. So I'd top it up, do it again, and I'd flatten it from side to side and then back and forth. So hopefully I didn't miss anything. And overall, I was happy how things were going for this. And any blemishes I'd be left with, I knew they'd be easy to sand out. Now, while the loft area dries, let's compare the Roll Nova to this Gyprock Easy Filler finish that I got discounted for £3 because it's just gone out of date. Not quite a fair test, but I thought it'd be fine. I'm not sure what it's like to roll it on because I used my trowel, but it felt very similar in texture and about the same ease to flatten with my speed skim. Although I do think it dries a little bit slower and sanding is a little bit harder. Both shrunk a little bit while drying, so a second coat is definitely needed, and it claims to be suitable for a 1 to 3 millimeter skim. But then disaster struck when I realised I hadn't taken enough loose skim off as a crack had formed around some of the new skim I'd done. This all needed to be removed and yet again more skimming. And you can also see in the background, I further dug out all of the cracks that I saw and filled them, as I wanted to put this job to bed once and for all, including this new area that I'd not shown you before, directly under our water tank. Again, spent more time in the loft to add more supports because the existing plasterboard was shy of the joist. So that big gap that I created earlier, I know that the roll over is not suitable for that because it's quite deep. So what I've done instead is mix some multi-purpose powdered filler because that should dry a lot quicker. And then when it comes to the surface, I'll be using the roll over or maybe the gyprock. And I'm going to go up there and fill in as much as I can. Now, if this filling doesn't work, I'll have to cut out a section of plasterboard and replace with new entirely. So back to the loft. It'd been a few days since my first coat, so I brushed it again with SBR, and my second coat is just a top up for any areas that looked low, although I did manage to run my roller along the sides of the hatch this time. And that second coat was dry by the next day, so I gave it a gentle sand with 120 grit sandpaper to remove any of my trowel lines and blemishes. I also sanded all the filled cracks that I'd done off camera, then gave it a final skim of the roll over, so this very fine layer should dry really quickly. Now some of you might be wondering why I haven't used paper tape for the areas where I haven't used mesh tape. And the reason for that is I've put noggins up there in the loft for an extra precaution to prevent cracking. Well, that's the idea anyway. And the reason I'm talking about this now, I just want to point something out here. So back in June, I showed you me filling cracks on the ceiling here. And there was a really bad one above me now, which I used noggins for, added more screws and filled it. But here, there was a crack that wasn't quite bad enough, I didn't think so anyway, for the support. So I just filled it, and I told you I was going to leave these as a test. And I think it'd be a good experiment to compare the two where I didn't bother with more supports up there, and I did with this, and no tape is used. Well, during that time, we've had an electrician in to fit solar, and obviously they've been walking around the loft, and we have noticed that hairline crack has come back again here. It's not here at all. So this has definitely worked, that hasn't. So I've since been up there and added more noggins, and I'll add some screws from below at a later date. It's just, I think it is a lot quicker than going the paper tape route. But there's one area that I do need to use it in the hallway, and I'll show you my foolproof way so there's no bubbles and you'll get a seamless finish. I found a crack running the opposite way of the joists, right next to the edge of the roof, and I didn't fancy crawling around up there for this one. So I decided to score along the crack to make it deeper and wider. And below me off camera, I've got my paper tape soaking in a bucket of water while I quickly smother the crack with a very wet mixture of 2-Pray's ready mix jointing compound. And because it's an L-shaped crack, I stuck the smaller piece on first, totally forgot to check which way the crease was on the tape, but for the longer one it was much more important, and I made sure the outer crease was touching the ceiling. First I used my filling knife to squeeze out any excess filler, then start squeezing even more out in a V-shaped fashion, which I also find prevents bubbles. Bubbles in paper tape is the most irritating thing. If you need to know how to fix them, I've got a video below in the description for you. I also run over and around it again with more wet compound so the paper soaks it all up. And once it's dry, I gave it a really gentle sand, so gentle, only to get rid of any slight protrusions, and go over it again with the same wet jointing compound. And once that was dry, a slightly thicker filler, sand once more, and I find that's all it needs before painting. But we're not ready for that step yet. This was one of the large areas where I used gyprock, and it took about 3 days for it to dry. And with time running out, I didn't want to wait that long again. So I took the decision to skim it with powder filler, which I seem to have accumulated many boxes of this stuff over the years, and it was dry within just a few hours, so I can crack on with the final sand. Now, while I've been seeing to all of these cracks and finding even more, and believe me, there's so much more to do in each room, Mr. TCD had already given the loft area 2 mist coats of paint. We use 50-50 paint and water so it doesn't just sit on bare plaster. And now the whole ceiling was ready, it was my turn to do it all in one go, again a mist coat, before we gave it a final 2 neat coats of paint. I can't believe this. I can't even see where I've been. In fact, I looked at the photo of how bad it looked before, well, the plasterboard joins, and it's just, I can't believe it. It's great. In fact, overall, this is my favourite section. I'm so glad I did it. And if you're wondering, the paint that we used for this after the emulsion mist coat was crack-free ceiling paint, just in case for the other areas. It's really, really thick and has left a little bit of a sheen. So I'll definitely be using matte plain emulsion on top after. But overall, yeah, highly recommend it. And if you look at the other areas, we had a really bad section about here, about there, don't know where I've been, and here. Although it doesn't help that there's not really any lights in here. In fact, that's one of the next jobs I think we need to do is install spotlights in here, particularly the hallway, because there's no natural light getting in there unless we have some of the bedroom doors open. But also we've ordered some AquaGuard durable satin finish for the architraves because we need to get all of that sorted next. Paint some of the old doors or replace them, but we've gone for water-based because I don't want yellowing again. It's happened to me too many times, and I do love oil-based. It's really hard wearing, particularly with dog claws, but I'm going to try this. Quite a few of you recommended on Instagram that this was one of the better ones, so we'll see how we get on with that. But I also want to take you to an exciting delivery that we've just had. Look, we've got double glazing that's arrived. So this is all the panes for the 2 French doors that we're having installed. So hopefully we'll be doing this in a couple of weeks. So I've got this one I need to turn into French doors. In fact, they're resting over there. And we've got one leaning on the archway there, ready to replace this. And I think we're going to try and replace this one first. I'm hoping we can angle it through the archway to fit it in. If not, we might have to cut the bricks for that, thread it through, and then install the other one first, so we're not so exposed. But because I mentioned I'd put noggies up there, the job for right now is me adding screws, filling them, and painting. It's never ending, this. But I know now, supports or paper tape. Anyway, I hope that's been useful, and if you've got any tips, tricks or advice, let me know, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching. Bye. I love this.